what are the people who support these changes? What are they saying? What is Assemblymember Pacheco saying why these changes are needed?
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit already, but supporters argue that agencies are being overwhelmed by increasingly large, repetitive, automated, or bad faith requests. They point to AI tools that can generate requests to scale, commercial actors seeking large data sets, and occasional like pranksters who abuse these requests. So I think they cited some this one lone example of some kind of a bad faith actor who simply, and he made his intentions known. I want to you know clog up the works at City Hall, and I'm just going to make these ridiculous requests for all of this information that's going to take you months or years to get to me. And by the way, there's already laws that allow agencies to deal with requests like that. But that's what they're citing. That's why they say that this need is here. And then they also say that taxpayers should not have to subsidize these requests for private profit or requests intended simply to overwhelm the agency. And so that's why they're saying, okay, we need uh, we need to implement these laws to deter these bad actors, but also to alleviate our burden or help pay for the cost of doing this, as opposed to allocating the money in the budget. We're gonna make the public pay for these things that they have a right to access. So our response, California Common Cause, as well as dozens of other organizations to this bill was, like I said, we recognize that some agencies face legitimate workload problems. The disagreement is over the remedy. Existing law already allows agencies to resist these truly, unduly burdensome requests. And it also allows them to obtain fees in litigation when a request is frivolous. The answer should be, like you said, better records management, proactive disclosure, um, you know, targeted solutions, not weakening access for everyone. And I'll just note in some of the testimony in favor of this bill, like some of these outlier examples were utilized, kind of these cherry pick. Um, and we don't I there's no data. Part of the problem is too, this bill was so rushed, and I don't know if it was because it was intentional to cram it through, but I'm not aware of any data on jurisdictions across California that would, give us an idea of, the extent of this over, the burden or the increase of public records requests. I'm sure it exists, but we don't have that data. We also don't have any data on how much California jurisdictions have invested in, modernizing and streamlining their public records request protocols. So all of that is relevant information when you're going to make massive, significant changes to one of the most important pieces of legislation in the state. And I would say, it's foundational to democratic institution. It's the public's right to know and participate in government. So this was essentially this bill. I have often described it as, a meat axe that really required a scalpel. When you're dealing with a law like this, there's going to be all kinds of unintended consequences that you're not always going to even realize until the bill's already passed. So you need to take the time to reach out and engage with interested parties, people on both sides of this argument, and think about not only what a proper solution is, but what the possible, consequences and collateral effects of those changes might have down the road.
Yeah, there has been, we've sued in Illinois, in DC, and in Maryland, Prince George County, Maryland, all criminal justice related agencies. And 201, it's the same arguments across jurisdiction, across level of the criminal justice system, across state, the District of Columbia, the Maryland, the other state, they all cry the same thing. And they're all in some state. And I call it this. And if we can't know, then you can hold us responsible for not knowing, because we couldn't have known, even though we're the ones keeping the technology so bad and keeping the records in such poor shape that we couldn't possibly know. Now, we're doing it on purpose, but since we can't know, you can't hold us responsible for not knowing. There's this eternal way of thinking, I think, when you get hired into government agencies, that you always have to cover up at all times, even the simplest requests. I've requested, I had a lawsuit against the Chicago Police Department. They gave us a document that didn't really fit in discovery. It didn't really fit what we were talking about, but it was something that I ended up wanting. So I FOIA'd them for that document and other documents similar that they created throughout the years. We never had such a document. We've never created one. There are no records. How is that possible? You gave it to me in discovery. But we came across that same thing against the police department, the prosecutors, the Illinois Department of Corrections, the police in D.C., the police in Prince George, Maryland. They all say they don't have, whether they have or they can't know, and it's all such a burden. It's very frustrating.